Recently, I found myself going down an eBay rabbit hole, shopping for a set of expensive Leica prime lenses for an upcoming project that may or may not ever happen. The set I want is around $20,000 used, which sounds like a lot, but is less than the cost of a single lens used for most Hollywood movies. I'm no stranger to the game of adding things to shopping carts that I can't really afford, and then going crazy on YouTube watching every review ever made. But considering I already have some great zoom lenses and some good enough primes, it got me thinking about what I really use and if investing in prime lenses is the right move for documentary filmmakers, especially if you're a beginner. Hey guys, welcome back, and if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, documentary cinematographer and filmmaker, and on this channel I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working as a documentary filmmaker and photographer. The debate on zoom versus prime is probably one of the oldest in filmmaking, and no matter what I say here, there are going to be a ton of people who disagree with me. But after a decade of making documentary visuals, I know what I use most of the time, and that's really all I can speak to in this video. But before I tell you what I think is the best option when you're starting out in documentary filmmaking, let's quickly go over the basic differences between zooms and primes and what each of them do well and not so well. At the end of the video, I'm going to tell you what I use and give some recommendations for what I might think about buying at different price points. In the early days of filmmaking, all lenses were prime lenses. The first zoom wasn't invented until something like 80 years after the first prime lens. I think it was in the 1920s or so. So for a lot of the history of photography, this wasn't even a choice people had to make. Prime lenses each cover one specific focal length, and cinematographers will typically have a full set of matching lenses that go from wide to telephoto. Because the lenses only have to cover one focal length, all the engineering and glass goes into making it as good as possible at that one specific thing. So if it's absolutely the best image quality you're going for, prime lenses might be the way to go. Or on the flip side of that, because they're so simple, basic prime lenses can be super cheap. You can find deals on old glass on eBay for under $100 and even some incredibly cheap new lenses on Amazon that are under $50. The image quality probably won't be much to write home about, but if you're really short on cash, this could be a good place to start. One thing though, just because they're cheap doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. Something like an old Nikon stills lens can have amazing image quality and some really cool character. And because nobody really uses them anymore, you can find them for next to nothing these days. Primes are also better in low light than zooms, and a good prime will almost always have a lower minimum f-stop than even the best zooms. A good prime lens will probably come with a 1.4 or maybe even a 1.2 aperture. And as far as I know, there are no zooms that go down to 1.4. Sigma's 18-35 1.8 comes close, but it only covers crop sensors, where most primes are good to cover up to full frame. So if primes are so much better and often cheaper than zooms, why would anyone use a zoom lens? The obvious answer is that zooms, well, zoom. A mid-range zoom might cover anything from 24 or 18 millimeters up to 70 or 120, and that can be incredibly useful. With a 24-120, for example, you have a 24, 35, 50, 85, and almost a 135 all-in-one lens. That can pretty much cover you for any shot you need in most normal situations. You'll be able to get a wide, a medium, and a close shot, all without having to change lenses, and that can be pretty huge in a tight environment or when there's something important happening and you absolutely have to get the shot at all costs. The trade-off is that most of the time you lose a few stops of light in exchange for the versatility. Usually the longer the zoom range, the higher minimum aperture. A normal 24-105 like Canon and Sony make is f4, which is 4 stops less compared to a good prime. That means to shoot in the same level of low light with a mid-range zoom, you'd need to jump your ISO from 800 up to 12,800 to get the same exposure, and you'll need a pretty good camera to be able to make usable images at those levels. A higher f-stop also means less depth of field, or bokeh, which is more of a creative choice than a necessity, but a lot of people associate shallow depth of field with cinematic images.
Cinematic.
You'll have to make up your own mind on that one, but you may want a little more depth than you can get at f4. I personally own a set of Fuji Cine Zooms that cost $4,000 each, and they can only go down to 2.9. So there really is a big difference between zooms and primes here. So which ones do I think are better for documentary filmmaking, especially if you're just starting out? I kind of want to give one of those infuriating "it depends" answers because they both have their place in doc shooting, but if I look at my own work and what I use the most, there's a clear winner. Zooms all the way. I can already hear people getting mad at me in the comments, and believe me, I understand why. When I was a photojournalist, I shot for over 2 years using nothing but a 35 prime, and I truly believed it helped me develop my eye so much more than a zoom lens would have. But for filming run and gun documentaries, zoom lenses are just so much easier. Let me go over a couple of reasons why. Unless you're doing staged recreations, in doc, you generally have to get the shot as it happens. You might be able to ask someone to repeat an action for you once or twice, but for most of the powerful moments in a story, if you miss it, that's it. You're dealing with real people, not actors. And if you ask them to stop and start because you were changing a lens, it's not gonna come off as natural. Zoom lenses are gonna allow you to stay on one lens for an entire scene and still get a variety of shots. And while not impossible exactly, this would be really hard with a prime lens. The next factor is weight. To cover as many focal lengths as a 24-70, you need to carry at least 3, if not 4 different prime lenses, and that adds up to some serious weight. Now, you don't necessarily need to cover all those focal lengths to get great images, and with a 2-lens combination like a 24 and a 50 or a 35 and an 85, you can do a ton. But it is still much easier to carry one lightweight zoom than a whole bunch of primes. Docs are often shot on the go, and you don't always have the luxury of a camera assistant to lug all your stuff around. A lot of times, I have to carry everything I need for the day in one backpack, so to be able to cover everything I need with 1 or 2 lenses is a big deal. So what would I buy? First, let's look at zooms and what I might buy as a first lens. These can go from pretty cheap to crazy expensive, and I've used a lot of different kinds in my career. Now, if you have a crop sensor and are on a budget, the answer is easy. The Sigma 18-35 and 50-100 are hands down the way to go in my opinion. They have a 1.8 minimum aperture, making them almost as bright as a prime, and the build quality and manual focus is just awesome. If you have a full frame camera, then I'd look at a standard 24-105 or maybe 24-70. They're classic zoom ranges for a reason. It's up to you to decide if you want the extra range or the extra stop of light. 24-105s are often stabilized, which makes a difference. And if you use Canon, another option is the 17-55. The documentary Cartel Land was shot mostly on this lens, and it was nominated for an Oscar. If you have any budget left over, a 70-200 is also really useful, and some of the f4 versions, especially if you buy used, aren't too expensive. I personally own an 18-35, a 24-70, a 24-120, a 16-35, and a 70-200. I also have the 2 Fuji MK Cinema Zooms, which I love, but they're not full frame, which means I have to only use them on my FX9, which has a super 35mm sensor option, unless I do a digital punch-in. At the same time, I also have a bunch of prime lenses, and I mostly use the Sigma art lenses, which I think are the best balance between quality and price out there. Even though I'm saying your first lens should be a zoom, having at least one fast prime like a 35 or a 50 or maybe a 24 is really handy for low light situations and sit down interviews. When I do really high-end budget docs for people like Netflix or National Geographic, they'll often send us out with an expensive zoom lens like maybe a Fuji Cabrio and a set of primes like maybe some Arri Master primes, but that's the dream scenario. It's unrealistic for most indie documentary filmmakers, and going into debt for gear when you're just starting out is a terrible idea. Personally, my buying order would be to start with a 24-105 or maybe 24-70, and then add a Sigma Art Prime as soon as you can, maybe a 24 or 35. After that, I'd get a cheap 70-200, maybe used, and with that combination, you're pretty much covered for any normal situation you'll find yourself in. Once you have those basics, you can slowly upgrade them as you get more and more jobs and add more and more primes over time. But if I was starting out again, that's what I'd do. Okay, so there it is, my take on the great zoom versus prime debate when it comes to starting out in documentaries. Let me know if you agree in the comments, and if you think I'm an idiot, let me know that too. And if you liked that video, you might like this other gear video about what I think is the world's greatest run and gun tripod. See ya.